The moment I saw that lipstick stain on his collar, I should have known my life was about to unravel. But after 35 years of marriage, you convince yourself that some battles aren't worth fighting, that some betrayals can be overlooked, for the sake of peace. I spent decades building a life with James, believing that loyalty and sacrifice would be rewarded with respect. I never imagined that one spring afternoon I would return from visiting my sister to find him casually moving his 29-year-old mistress into our guest house, into the home I had designed with my own hands. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. When I confronted him, standing there in our marble foyer with my suitcase still in hand, his response wasn't an apology. It was a suggestion that perhaps I should be the one to find other accommodations. If their arrangement made me uncomfortable, 35 years of marriage, and he thought he could dismiss me like an inconvenient houseguest. What James didn't know, what he never bothered to learn during our marriage, was that the grand estate he thought was his actually belonged to me. And after decades of silence and sacrifice, I was finally ready to reclaim what was mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Thompson. I'm 63 years old, though most people guess I'm in my early 50s. Good genes and a religious skincare routine, I suppose. I was once Eleanor Mitchell, daughter of a middle school English teacher and a city planner from Oak Ridge, a modest suburb where dreams were practical and ambitions were reasonable. I studied architecture at State University, where I met James Thompson during my senior year. He was in the business program, charismatic and ambitious, with the kind of confidence that made everyone in a room turn to listen when he spoke. I was quieter, more deliberate, but no less determined. My professors had called my designs innovative, even revolutionary. There was talk of fellowships, of my potential for changing skylines. We married 6 months after graduation. James had landed a position at Meridian Development, a small but promising real estate company. I had offers from 3 prestigious firms, including one that would have taken me to Chicago. "That's the wonderful thing about architecture," James Dobby Saus said when I showed him the letters. "You can do it anywhere, anytime. My career needs to happen now." So I declined the offers, took a junior position at a local firm, and focused on supporting James as he climbed the corporate ladder. It wasn't a decision I regretted, not for many years. We moved into a starter home in Lakeview, a new development, where all the houses had the same beige siding and postage stamp yards. I worked part-time, then freelance after our daughter Emily was born. James's hours grew longer, his ambitions bigger. By our 10th anniversary, he had become the youngest vice president at Meridian. We celebrated with champagne on the balcony of our new home in Westlake Hills, a sprawling property with 5 bedrooms, a pool, and a view of the city lights that made my heart ache with its beauty. "We made it, Ellie," James said, his arm around my waist, his breath warm against my neck. "Everything I ever promised you." But the house wasn't his accomplishment, though he spoke of it that way. It was mine, or rather, my Uncle Richard's, gift to me. Uncle Richard was my mother's older brother, a bachelor and self-made real estate investor who had amassed considerable wealth through careful, shrewd investments. The only smart businessman who didn't lose his soul along the way, my mother used to say. He had no children of his own, but he'd always shown special interest in my education and career. When I gave up the Chicago offer, he called me directly, the only time I ever heard disappointment in his voice. "Your talent shouldn't be sacrificed, Eleanor," he told me. "Not even for love, especially not for love." But I was 23, and thought I knew everything about life and compromise. We didn't speak for nearly 2 years after that, until he showed up unannounced at Emily's christening. He stood awkwardly at the back of the church, tall and distinguished in his charcoal suit, looking so much like my late father that my breath caught. After the service, he handed me an envelope, For my grandniece, he said formally, and for you, to secure your future. Inside was the deed to a house, the Westlake Hills property, along with papers establishing a trust in my name. The trust held not only the house deed, but also a significant number of shares in several companies, including Meridian Development. Uncle Richard had been quietly investing in James's company for years. "The house is yours alone," Uncle Richard told me. Later, when we met for coffee, "Not jointly owned. I've structured it that way for a reason, Eleanor. The same with the trust. It's your safety net, your independence. Don't tell James. Men like him, they need to believe they're the providers, the conquerors. Let him think that, but know your own power." I kept my promise. James assumed the house was purchased through his company connections, with his bonus and our combined savings. I never corrected him. The deed remained in my name, filed away in a safety deposit box James knew nothing about. The trust grew under Uncle Richard's management, then under the guidance of his attorney after he passed away 5 years later. I received quarterly statements at a post office box, watched the numbers grow, and kept silent. Perhaps it was wrong to keep such a secret in a marriage. But as the years passed, as James grew more absorbed in his career and less interested in our partnership, the secret became a comfort. It was the one piece of myself I hadn't surrendered to the altar of his ambition. By our 20th anniversary, James had been named CEO of Meridian, which had grown from a local player to a regional powerhouse. I had all but abandoned my professional aspirations, channeling my creativity instead into extensive renovations of our home, volunteer work with the Historical Preservation Society, and raising Emily to believe she could pursue her dreams without compromise. I told myself I was content, that the choices I'd made were worth the sacrifices. Then came the lipstick stain, coral pink on a white collar, discovered as I sorted laundry one Sunday afternoon while James was allegedly at an emergency board meeting. I stared at it for a long time, that small smear of another woman's existence in my carefully constructed life. Then I placed the shirt back in the hamper and continued with my day. That night, when James returned home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, I served the pot roast I'd prepared and asked about his meeting. "Productive," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We may have found a solution to the Riverside project issues." I nodded and poured more wine. "That's good." It became our unspoken arrangement. His indiscretions, my silence. I told myself it was a phase, that it didn't threaten what we'd built together. I focused on Emily, now in college studying environmental law. I redid the kitchen, started a small garden in the backyard, joined a book club. I constructed a life in the negative spaces of his absence. Until Vanessa Carson appeared at our 20th anniversary party, hired as the photographer by James's assistant. She was 24 then, with auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper and a laugh that carried across crowded rooms. I watched my husband watch her throughout the evening, his eyes following her movements with an intensity I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I saw how he maneuvered to speak with her alone by the bar, how his hand lingered on her shoulder. I should have confronted him then, should have demanded respect, or at least discretion. Instead, I smiled for the photos, accepted congratulations from friends and colleagues, and pretended not to notice when James slipped Vanessa his business card with what he thought was subtlety. The affair began shortly after. James's late meetings became more frequent. Weekend conferences multiplied. Once, I found a receipt for 2 rooms at the Lakeside Hotel downtown, though the company event he allegedly attended only required one night's stay. I folded the paper and placed it in his desk drawer, saying nothing. My silence wasn't born of fear or even denial. It was exhaustion. The emotional labor of confrontation seemed greater than I could bear. And beneath that, a cold calculation was forming. Emily would graduate soon. The renovation of the east wing of the house would be complete. Uncle Richard's trust had grown to a substantial sum. Perhaps when all the pieces were in place, I would finally speak my truth and walk away. But life rarely follows our carefully laid plans. 3 years after our anniversary party, James suffered a heart attack while at the office. I was called at 2 a.m. by his executive assistant, telling me he had been rushed to Mercy General. I arrived to find him pale and diminished against the hospital sheets, tubes snaking from his arms, his vulnerability shocking after decades of projected strength. "Ellie," he whispered when he saw me, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry. For everything." I sat beside him, holding that hand, and believed him. For 6 weeks, I nursed him back to health. I managed his medications, prepared heart-healthy meals, attended every doctor's appointment, even fielded calls from the office so he could focus on recovery. I did this not out of obligation, but from a place I thought long buried: love. The crisis seemed to have shaken something loose in both of us, creating space for repair and renewal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For almost 2 years, we rebuilt our relationship. James worked fewer hours. We took weekend trips to the coast. He asked about my interests, seemed genuinely engaged when I talked about my architectural sketches, which I had quietly resumed. He joined me in the garden on Sunday mornings, learning the names of flowers I had planted. He called when he was running late. No more lipstick stains appeared on his collars. Then came his second heart attack, more severe than the first. This time, he required bypass surgery. The recovery was longer, more arduous. I converted our home office into a temporary bedroom on the first floor so he wouldn't have to navigate stairs. I hired a part-time nurse but handled most of his care myself. For nearly 4 months, I barely slept, moving between his bedside, the kitchen where I prepared his meals, and the small desk in our bedroom where I managed household affairs and responded to his business emails. During his convalescence, I discovered that Meridian was facing significant financial challenges. A major development in the city's North Quarter had stalled due to permit issues and environmental concerns. Cost overruns on 3 other projects had depleted cash reserves. The board was getting restless. James was terrified of losing control of the company he had built. Without telling him, I contacted Uncle Richard's attorney, who still managed my trust. I instructed him to purchase additional shares in Meridian through a proxy, enough to stabilize the stock price and reassure investors. It worked. By the time James returned to work part-time, the crisis had eased. He attributed it to loyalty from long-term investors and his leadership team's competence in his absence. I said nothing about my intervention. Perhaps that was my mistake. Continuing to operate in silence, to fix problems without recognition. Because 6 months after his return to full health, James met Vanessa again at a charity gala. She had established herself as a sought-after event photographer, had even published a book of urban landscapes that captured the changing face of our city. James brought the book home, placed it on our coffee table, mentioned casually that he had reconnected with that talented young photographer from a few years back. I saw the signs, all too familiar now. The late meetings resumed, the weekend absences, the distracted conversations over dinner. But this time, there was a new energy to his deception, an almost youthful giddiness. He bought new clothes, lost weight, started using products in his hair to hide the gray that had appeared during his illness. "You seem rejuvenated," I said, one morning, watching him select a tie with unusual care. "I feel good," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Better than I have in years." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "I'm glad. You deserve happiness, James." He paused then, tie in hand, and finally looked at me. Something like guilt flashed across his face. "You do too, Ellie. You know that, right?" I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. Of course. The affair intensified over the next 6 months. James grew careless, or perhaps simply didn't care if I knew. Twice I answered calls to his cell phone when he was in the shower, hearing Vanessa's voice before she quickly hung up. I found receipts for jewelry I never received, dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants I'd never visited, once returning. From book club earlier than expected, I saw them together in his car in our driveway, her head thrown back in laughter, his hand on her knee. I waited for anger, for the righteous fury I deserved to feel. Instead, I felt a strange, calm clarity. Not acceptance, never that, but a growing certainty about what needed to be done. My sister Catherine had been urging me for years to visit, her in Boston. "You need a break, Ellie," she would say during our weekly calls. "James can survive without you for a few days." This time, when she called with her annual invitation, I accepted. "Really?" Catherine couldn't hide her surprise. "You're actually coming?" "For a week," I confirmed. "I need some perspective." "Hallelujah," she breathed. "Finally." I booked the flights myself, packed carefully, and informed James of my plans 3 days before departure. "A week?" He frowned, looking up from his laptop. "That's quite a long visit." "We have 35 years of catching up to do," I replied mildly. "And you'll be busy with work. You'll hardly notice I'm gone." He didn't argue, which told me everything I needed to know about his plans in my absence. The week with Catherine was transformative. My sister, 5 years younger and infinitely wiser in matters of self-respect, lived alone in a beautiful brownstone in Boston's Back Bay. Divorced after 15 years from a man she described as a spectacular waste of my 30s, she had rebuilt her life on her own terms. She ran a successful art gallery, traveled extensively, and maintained a circle of fiercely independent friends who welcomed me into their fold without hesitation. "When are you going to leave him, Ellie?" Catherine asked on my 3rd night, as we shared a bottle of wine on her rooftop garden. "You know about the affairs. You can't possibly still believe things will change." I watched a moth flutter around the patio light, its wings casting enormous, distorted shadows. "It's complicated." "It's really not," she countered. "He disrespects you, repeatedly. What's complicated about that?" I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. 35 years, Kath. Most of my adult life. All the more reason not to waste any more time. She reached for my hand. "What are you afraid of?" I considered her question seriously. "Starting. Over at 63. Being alone. Facing the pity in people's eyes." I paused. "And maybe discovering that I've been complicit in my own unhappiness for too long." Catherine squeezed my fingers. "You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor. You've just forgotten how to use that strength for yourself instead of everyone else." The next morning, I called Uncle Richard's attorney and requested a complete accounting of my trust. The numbers were better than I'd anticipated. In addition to the house, I had liquid assets sufficient to live comfortably for the rest of my life, even accounting for inflation and potential healthcare costs. My ownership, stake in Meridian, had grown to 18%, not controlling interest, but significant enough to command attention from the board. "You're in an excellent position, Mrs. Thompson," the attorney assured me. "Your uncle's foresight and your patience have paid substantial dividends." "Thank you," I said, making a decision that had been forming since my conversation with Catherine. "I'd like to make some changes to the trust structure." I spent the next 2 days with lawyers, financial advisors, and real estate experts recommended by Catherine's network. By the time I boarded my return flight, I had set in motion a series of actions that would fundamentally alter the landscape of my marriage and James's carefully constructed world. I was scheduled to return on a Thursday afternoon. I told James my flight wouldn't arrive until evening, knowing full well he would use the extra hours for his own purposes. I wanted to see how far things had progressed in my absence. The taxi dropped me at our curved driveway just after 2 o'clock. The silver Mercedes parked beside James's BMW was unfamiliar, its trunk open and filled with expensive luggage. A young woman in yoga pants and a silk blouse was directing movers who carried boxes from the car toward our guest house, the Space. I had renovated just last year as a potential apartment for Emily when she visited from graduate school. I paid the driver and wheeled my suitcase up the drive, unhurried, observing. The woman, Vanessa, I presumed, though we had never been formally introduced, was too absorbed in her task to notice me until I was almost upon her. "Excuse me," I said pleasantly. "Can I help you?" She turned, startled, her copper hair catching the afternoon sun. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by a brief flash of guilt that she quickly masked with practiced composure. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, extending her hand with remarkable poise. "I'm Vanessa Carson. It's a pleasure to finally meet you properly." I accepted her handshake, noting the firmness of her grip, the perfect manicure, the expensive watch on her wrist. Up close, she was even more striking than I remembered. High cheekbones, clear green eyes, skin that still possessed the luminosity of youth. I could understand the attraction, even as I registered the audacity of this moment. "The pleasure is mine," I replied, matching her composure. "Though I admit, I'm curious about what appears to be happening here." Before she could respond, James emerged from the guest house, a bottle of champagne in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. He froze when he saw me, color draining from his face. "Ellie," he managed, his voice strangled. "You're early." "Evidently," I agreed, still smiling pleasantly. "Just in time for the housewarming, it seems." James set the champagne and glasses on a nearby garden table with exaggerated care, buying time. When he turned back to me, his businessman's mask was firmly in place, the same expression he used when navigating board meetings or difficult negotiations. "I was going to discuss this with you tonight," he began, approaching slowly, as if I were a skittish animal that might bolt. "Vanessa's apartment building is being renovated. She needs a temporary place to stay." "For how long?" I inquired, as if we were discussing something as mundane as a change in dinner plans. James and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance. 6 months, she supplied. "Maybe a bit longer. The contractors are notoriously unreliable." "I see." I nodded thoughtfully. "And of all the places in the city, our guest house seemed the most convenient option." James stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ellie, let's discuss this inside, privately." "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," I replied, raising my voice slightly to ensure Vanessa could hear every word. "I believe in transparency, James. Something our marriage has lacked for quite some time." His jaw tightened. "Eleanor, you're making a scene." "Am I? I thought I was simply asking questions about why my husband is moving his mistress into our home while I'm away." Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "I should go," she murmured, reaching for her purse on the Mercedes hood. "Please don't," I said, turning to her. "This conversation involves you too, Vanessa. After all, you've been involved in my marriage for years now. First as the occasional distraction, and now, apparently, as a more permanent fixture." James's face had flushed an alarming shade of red. "That's enough," he hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." I laughed then, a genuine sound that seemed to startle both of them. "No, James. For the first time in years, I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm standing in my own truth." I turned to face him fully. "Did you really think I didn't know? All these years?" Confusion rippled across his features. "If you knew, why didn't you ever say anything?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly over the past week with Catherine. Because I thought silence was the price of peace. Because I believed that what we built together was worth more than my dignity. I shook my head. I was wrong. Ellie. James's voice softened, taking on the placating tone he used when trying to close difficult deals. Let's be reasonable about this. We've been married for 35 years. We have history, commitments, appearances to maintain. Appearances? I echoed, nodding. Yes, those have always been important to you. More important than honesty, than respect. I glanced at Vanessa, who stood frozen beside her car. Does she know about the others? Before her, I mean. James's jaw clenched. Stop it. She deserves to know what she's getting into, I continued calmly. The pattern is fairly consistent. 2 years, perhaps 3. Then your eye wanders again. Though I must say, moving someone into our home, that's new. A bold escalation. I love her, James said suddenly, the words hanging in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown down. I studied his face, searching for the man I had married. The one I had nursed through illness, supported through career challenges, built a life alongside. I saw instead a stranger, one whose selfishness had been enabled by my silence for far too long. If that's true, I said finally, then you should have had the courage to end our marriage honorably before inviting her into our home. That's what I'm trying to do now, he insisted, his voice rising. I was going to talk to you tonight, explain everything. After the fact, I interrupted. After moving her in, after deciding unilaterally how this would proceed. I shook my head. Once again, you present me with a fait accompli and expect me to adapt to your decisions. What do you want me to say? Frustration edged his words. That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry for how this is happening. But I'm not sorry for following my heart. I deserve happiness, Ellie. We both do. On that much, we agree. I straightened my shoulders, which is why I think you should both find somewhere else to live. James stared at me, bewilderment, giving way to indignation. Excuse me? You heard me correctly, I said, reaching into my purse for the folder I had prepared in Boston. This house is no longer available to either of you. This is my house, James sputtered, color rising in his cheeks again. My name is on the mortgage. Actually, it isn't. I opened the folder and extracted the deed, holding it so he could see the single name listed as owner, Eleanor Thompson. This house has always been in my name alone. A gift from Uncle Richard, placed in trust for me 30 years ago. James stared at the document, disbelief etched across his features. That's impossible. I paid for this house. You contributed, I corrected, but the property has always been mine, as is a significant portion of Meridian development, as it happens. The blood drained from his face. What are you talking about? 18% ownership, to be precise, I continued, extracting another document from the folder. Which makes me the second largest individual shareholder after you. The board has been notified of my intention to take a more active role in company governance moving forward. James grabbed the papers from my hand, scanning them with increasing agitation. This is fraud, he sputtered. You've been hiding assets. No, James. I've been protecting what's rightfully mine. There's a difference. I reclaimed the documents, returning them carefully to the folder. Now, as I was saying, I'd like you both to find other accommodations. Immediately. Vanessa, who had remained silent throughout our exchange, finally spoke. James, what is she talking about? You told me this was your house. It is, he insisted, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. She's bluffing. She can't just throw us out. Actually, I can, I replied, retrieving my phone from my purse. But if you prefer, we can involve the authorities. I'm sure the board would be fascinated to learn about their CEO's domestic situation playing out in the local police blotter. James's face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You wouldn't dare. I've already dared more than you ever gave me credit for, I said quietly. I suggest you pack what you need for tonight and make arrangements for the rest of your things. I'll have my attorney contact you regarding next steps. This is ridiculous, James spat. You think after 35 years you can just— Yes, I interrupted, my voice steady. I do. Because after 35 years of putting your needs first, I've finally recognized that my happiness matters too. I turned to Vanessa. I suggest you reconsider the champagne. This isn't a celebration. It's a cautionary tale. With that, I wheeled my suitcase past them both and walked up the path to the front door, my door, leaving them standing in stunned silence beside their half-unpacked cars. As I entered the foyer, the familiar scent of lemon polish and fresh flowers enveloped me. For the first time in decades, I felt truly at home. Not as James Thompson's wife, not as the silent partner in a compromised marriage, but as Eleanor Thompson, architect of her own destiny. I set down my suitcase, closed the door behind me, and smiled. I spent that first night alone in my house, savoring the silence. I opened a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion, and reclaiming my life certainly qualified. Carrying my glass through each room, I reacquainted myself with the space, seeing it with fresh eyes. The master bedroom with its vaulted ceiling that I'd designed to capture morning light. The reading nook in the upstairs hallway where Emily had spent countless hours lost in books. The kitchen with its hand-selected marble countertops and the antique wooden island I'd restored myself. Every corner held memories, not all of them painful. James called 17 times that night. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to his messages evolve from indignant demands to wounded pleas to thinly veiled threats. Around midnight, the tone shifted again, becoming coldly strategic. Eleanor, be reasonable, his final message began. I've consulted with my attorney. You can't just change the locks and throw me out. Regardless of whose name is on the deed, this house is marital property. We need to discuss this like rational adults. I deleted the message and slept. Better than I had in years. Morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows when my phone rang again. This time, it was Catherine. Well? She demanded without preamble. Did you do it? I smiled, stretching luxuriously against the pillows. I did. And? James and his mistress are presumably spending their first night together at the Westlake Hotel instead of my guest house. Catherine's laugh rang out, bright and satisfied. God, I wish I could have seen his face. What did he say when you showed him the deed? He accused me of fraud, naturally. I sat up, pulling my robe around me. He couldn't fathom that I'd kept such a secret for so long. Men like James never can, Catherine replied. They're so accustomed to women accommodating their secrets that they can't imagine we might have our own. She paused. Has he tried to come back yet? Just by phone. He'll make his next move today, I expect, probably with legal representation in tow. Are you worried? I considered the question honestly. No, I decided. For the first time in decades, I'm not worried about James's reactions. Whatever happens next, I know I can handle it. That, my sister said firmly, is the Eleanor I've missed. After showering and dressing with particular care, a tailored navy pantsuit I'd purchased in Boston, pearl earrings that had belonged to our mother, I made breakfast, then called Uncle Richard's attorney, Martin Webb. I was expecting your call, Mrs. Thompson, he said when his secretary put me through. I understand yesterday was eventful. I smiled at his understatement. You could say that. Has James's attorney contacted you yet? Not directly, but I received notice this morning that Terrence Hamilton has been retained to represent Mr. Thompson's interests. He paused. Hamilton is aggressive, particularly in high-asset divorces. Should I assume that's where this is heading? Yes, I confirmed, the word strangely liberating. After 35 years, I'm finally filing for divorce. I see. Papers rustled. On his end of the line. In that case, I recommend we meet today to discuss strategy. Your husband will undoubtedly challenge the trust arrangements, claim entitlement to at least half the assets. Let him try, I replied, surprising myself, with the steel in my voice. I've spent 3 decades letting James think he held all the cards. I'm not folding now. We arranged to meet at 11. As I was gathering my purse and keys, the doorbell rang. The first salvo in what I expected would be a protracted battle. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see 2 figures, one tall and rigid-shouldered, unmistakably James, the other shorter with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. I opened the door, deliberately using just enough force to make them step back. "James," I greeted calmly, "and this must be Mr. Hamilton." The lawyer, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes and an expensive suit, extended his hand. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been retained to represent your husband's interests in this unfortunate situation." I didn't accept the handshake. I assumed as much. "I'm meeting with my own attorney shortly, so whatever you've come to say, please be concise." James bristled visibly at my tone, but Hamilton maintained his practiced smile. "May we come in? This would be better discussed privately." I considered, refusing, making them state their case on the doorstep like unwelcome solicitors. But there was a certain advantage to allowing them into a space that was now indisputably mine. "Briefly," I agreed, stepping aside. They followed me to the living room, neither taking a seat until I gestured toward the sofa. I chose my favorite armchair opposite them, crossing my legs and waiting expectantly. Hamilton opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. "Mrs. Thompson, while we understand you're upset about personal matters between you and your husband, we believe there's been a significant misunderstanding regarding property ownership and financial entitlements." "There's no misunderstanding," I replied evenly. "The deed to this house has been in my name since purchase. The trust established by my uncle has been properly maintained and documented for 30 years. All perfectly legal, all properly disclosed in annual tax filings." James leaned forward, unable to contain himself. "Filing separate tax returns without my knowledge was deliberate deception, Eleanor. You've been hiding assets throughout our entire marriage." "I never hid anything," I countered. "I simply didn't volunteer information you never bothered to ask about. There's a difference." Hamilton cleared his throat. "Regardless of how the arrangement began, Mrs. Thompson, the reality is that under state law, assets acquired during marriage are considered marital property subject to equitable distribution. This includes the house and any investment accounts, regardless of whose name appears on the documents." "Normally, yes," I agreed pleasantly. "However, inherited assets maintained separately, as mine were through the trust, remain individual property unless deliberately commingled." My uncle was very specific about the structure of his bequest, and his attorneys were meticulous in maintaining its integrity. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hamilton's face. "Even so, your husband has contributed significantly to the maintenance and improvement of this property, establishing claim through financial contribution and 30 years of residency." "Actually," I replied, "the trust has covered all major maintenance and renovations. I have complete financial records documenting every expenditure. James's contributions were limited to utility bills and occasional landscaping costs, hardly sufficient to establish ownership interest in a property. Valued at several $1,000,000. James's face darkened. "This is absurd. I've paid for everything in our life together. Your uncle's trust was a minor supplement at best." I turned to him, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Is that what you told yourself all these years? That my inheritance was insignificant? That I remained financially dependent on you despite evidence to the contrary?" I shook my head. Your willful blindness is almost impressive, James. Hamilton, sensing the conversation derailing, interjected smoothly. Perhaps we should focus on finding an amicable resolution. Mr. Thompson is prepared to be generous in settling this matter quickly and discreetly. Generous? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Please, elaborate. Hamilton slid a document across the coffee table. A preliminary proposal. Mr. Thompson will not contest divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. He's prepared to offer you a settlement of $2 million and continued health insurance coverage. In exchange, you would relinquish all claims to this property, any interest in Meridian development, and agree to confidentiality regarding the circumstances of your separation. I didn't even glance at the paper. Mr. Hamilton, your client seems to be operating under the misapprehension that he's in a position to offer me anything. Let me clarify the actual situation. I own this house outright. I control 18% of Meridian's shares, making me the second largest individual shareholder. I have substantial independent assets that have never been commingled with marital funds. I leaned forward slightly. In short, I don't need James's generosity. He, however, might very well need mine. James stood abruptly, his face flushed. This is extortion. You're threatening to use your shares against me, to undermine my position at the company I built. The company we built, I corrected quietly. My investment helped Meridian weather multiple financial crises over the years, including the one during your recovery from heart surgery. The board knows this now. They've been fully briefed on my ownership stake and my intentions going forward. Which are what exactly? Hamilton asked, watching me carefully. I smiled. To ensure Meridian operates ethically, transparently, and without the distraction of its CEO's personal scandals becoming public knowledge. You wouldn't, James breathed, genuine alarm flashing across his face. I have no desire to harm the company, I clarified. Unlike you, I don't use people as pawns in personal vendettas. But I will protect my investment and my reputation. The board deserves to know exactly who they're dealing with in both regards. Hamilton cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should take a step back. Clearly, our initial proposal requires reconsideration in light of additional factors. He began gathering his documents. Mrs. Thompson, would you be amenable to meeting with me later this week, once we've had a chance to reassess? My attorney will contact you, I replied, rising to indicate the meeting was concluded. In the meantime, I expect James to remove his personal belongings from this house by the end of the week. He can coordinate timing with the security service. I've engaged. Security service? James repeated incredulously. Yes, they'll be monitoring the property 24 hours a day, for everyone's protection and peace of mind. I walked them to the door, maintaining the composed demeanor that had served me well throughout our marriage, though for entirely different purposes now. As they stepped onto the porch, James turned back, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been genuine regret. Why now, Ellie? He asked quietly. After all these years of silence, why choose this moment to blow everything up? I studied him. This man I had loved, supported, and eventually outgrown. Because watching you move another woman into my home, while I was away, was the final confirmation of something I've suspected for years. You've never respected me. Not as a partner, not as a person deserving of basic honesty. I held his gaze steadily. I stayed silent before because I thought peace was worth more than truth. I was wrong. And what about everything we built together? He pressed. 35 years just discarded? You discarded our marriage years ago, James. I'm simply acknowledging what's already been broken beyond repair. I stepped back, one hand on the door. Goodbye. As I closed the door on his stunned expression, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, not regret or sorrow, but a profound sense of reclamation. For the first time in decades, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of his potential reaction. The freedom was dizzying. My meeting with Martin Webb confirmed what I already suspected. Legally, my position was strong. The trust had been meticulously maintained as separate property. The house deed had never included James's name. My ownership, stake in Meridian, had been properly acquired and documented. Your uncle's foresight was remarkable, Martin observed as we reviewed the trust documents in his office. Almost as if he anticipated this exact scenario. I smiled faintly, remembering Uncle Richard's words from so long ago. Know your own power. He understood certain realities about marriage and money that took me much longer to grasp. Well, his precautions have served you well. Mr. Thompson will undoubtedly pursue claims based on length of marriage and commingled lifestyle benefits. But his position is fundamentally weak. Martin closed the folder before him. That said, these battles can be protracted and unpleasant. Are you prepared for what might come next? I've endured 35 years of a marriage built on compromise and willful blindness, I replied. I can certainly handle a few months of legal maneuvering. The reality, however, proved more challenging than I had anticipated. James, thwarted, in his initial attempt to claim ownership of the house, shifted tactics with alarming speed. First came the financial maneuvers. Joint credit cards canceled without warning. Utilities at the house suddenly transferred out of automatic payment status. Our shared bank accounts, which I had fortunately never relied upon for significant funds, drained overnight. Then came the social offensive. Mutual friends received calls painting me as unstable, vindictive, possibly suffering from early onset. A dementia. Eleanor has been acting strangely for months, I was told, he confided to our oldest friends, the Clarksons. I've been trying to protect her privacy, but I'm genuinely worried about her mental state. Most insidious were the attempts to turn Emily against me. Our daughter, now 32 and establishing her legal career in Chicago, had always been closer to me than to James. He had been an indulgent but distant father, proud of her accomplishments, but uninvolved in the daily work of parenting. Now, suddenly, he was calling her daily, spinning tales of financial hardship and emotional abandonment. "Mom, what's going on?" Emily demanded when she called me 3 days after James's visit with Hamilton. "Dad says you've locked him out of the house and frozen all his accounts. He says you're having some kind of breakdown." I sighed, settling deeper into my chair. "That's not remotely accurate, sweetheart. Your father moved his girlfriend into our guest house while I was visiting Aunt Catherine. When I objected, he suggested I should be the one to find other accommodations." "What?" Emily's shock was evident even through the phone. "Dad has a girlfriend? Since when?" "This particular one, about 5 years on and off, but there have been others throughout our marriage." The words felt strange to say aloud after decades of silent knowledge. "And you knew? All this time?" Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "Yes." "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you leave?" It was the same question Catherine had asked, the same one I'd been asking myself with increasing frequency. "It's complicated, Em. I made choices that seemed right at the time. For you, for the stability of our family, for peace. But I reached my limit when he tried to install his mistress in our home." There was a long silence. Then, "Dad never mentioned any girlfriend. He said you suddenly became obsessed with money, claiming the house was yours alone, and that you'd been hiding assets for years." "The house has always been in my name," I explained. "A gift from Uncle Richard placed in trust before you were born. And I haven't been hiding assets. I've been managing my inheritance independently, as was always." "Intended. Uncle Richard left you the house?" Emily sounded bewildered. "I always thought Dad bought it." "He wanted everyone to think that," I replied. "The truth is, your father's financial contributions to our life together were far less significant than he led people to believe." His pride couldn't handle the reality that much of our security came from my inheritance. "I need to process this," Emily said finally. "It's like finding out my entire childhood was built on. I don't even know what." "It wasn't a lie," I insisted gently. "The love in our home was real. My love for you, for our family. The compromises I made were my choice, for better or worse. I don't regret the life we built, Emily. I only regret allowing your father's ego to dictate the narrative for so long." After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, wondering if I had said enough, or perhaps too much. Emily deserved the truth, but she also deserved to preserve whatever relationship with her father she valued. Threading that needle would require careful balance in the weeks ahead. The following day brought a new complication. Vanessa Carson arrived at my door unannounced, her copper hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, her expression a study in contained emotion. "Mrs. Thompson," she said when I opened the door. "I need to speak with you." I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She followed me to the kitchen, declining my automatic offer of coffee or tea. We sat at the island, the polished marble, surface between us like neutral territory and contested land. "I want you to know," she began carefully, "that James never told me he was moving me into your home without your knowledge or consent. He said you were separating, that you had already agreed to divorce, and that you were relocating to Boston. Permanently." I nodded, unsurprised. That sounds like James, reshaping reality to suit his preferred narrative. "I wouldn't have agreed to move in otherwise," she continued. "Whatever you might think of me, I'm not. I wouldn't deliberately participate in something so disrespectful." I studied her across the island, this woman barely older than my daughter, who had become entangled in the web of James's manipulations. In another context, under different circumstances, I might have liked her. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a directness in her manner that suggested she was more than just the younger woman James had selected to stroke his aging ego. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Vanessa straightened her shoulders. "Because I'm ending my relationship with James and I wanted you to know why." She pushed a small stack of papers across the marble toward me. "He's been lying to both of us, about everything." I glanced down at the papers, printouts of emails, financial statements, text message screenshots. What am I looking at? Evidence. That James has been systematically moving company funds into personal accounts for years, she replied, including during his medical leave, when he claimed to be uninvolved in business operations. He's been skimming profits, manipulating project budgets, and hiding assets from both company oversight and, I suspect, from you. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as I scanned the documents. The amounts were substantial. Millions. Diverted through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. If these records were accurate, James had been engaged in serious financial misconduct for much of his tenure as CEO. "How did you get access to these?" I asked, looking up from the damning evidence. A faint flush colored Vanessa's cheeks. "I'm not just a photographer. My undergraduate degree was in financial forensics. Before pursuing photography full-time, I worked for a firm that specialized in tracking hidden assets in high-net-worth divorces." She paused. "James doesn't know about my background. He thinks I'm just decorative." Despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my lips. His underestimation of women seems to be a pattern. When I realized he had lied about your knowledge and consent regarding the move, I became suspicious about other claims he'd made. So I did some digging. Her expression hardened. What I found disgusted me. I wanted no part of it. "Why bring this to me? Why not go to the authorities?" Vanessa met my gaze directly. "Because you deserve to know the truth before anyone else. This affects you most directly. What you choose to do with the information is your decision." I considered her words, turning them over like stones in a riverbed, searching for hidden currents. "You realize this will likely destroy him, professionally, possibly legally. Yes. No hesitation, no regret in her voice. Men like James count on the silence and complicity of the women around them. They believe their charm and position shield them from consequences. She stood, gathering her purse. I refused to be complicit in my father's financial misconduct years ago, which effectively ended our relationship. I won't make a different choice with James. As she moved toward the door, I found myself following, questions still forming. Does James know you've discovered this? That you're leaving? Not yet, she replied, pausing at the threshold. I've moved my things out while he's at the office today. I'll be gone before he returns to the hotel. She turned to face me fully. For what it's worth, Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry for any pain my involvement with your husband caused you. Had I known the full truth from the beginning, I would have made different choices. After she left, I spent hours reviewing the documents she'd provided, each page revealing new depths to James's deception. This wasn't just about his infidelity or his attempt to remove me from my own home. This was systematic fraud that placed the entire company, and by extension, my significant investment in it, at risk. I called Martin immediately. We need to meet with the board, I said without preamble when he answered. Tomorrow, if possible. I have information they need to see before this goes any further. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following day. I arrived early, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit and minimal jewelry, projecting the quiet authority that had always been my natural state, though rarely exercised in public. The boardroom fell silent as I entered, 8 pairs of eyes following, my progress to the empty seat at the far end of the table. Most of these men had known me for years as James's wife, the pleasant, supportive spouse who appeared at company functions, made appropriate small talk, then faded into the background. Today, they were meeting Eleanor Thompson, significant, shareholder and whistleblower. Mrs. Thompson, Walter Griffin, the board chairman, greeted me with careful formality. We understand you have urgent information to share with us. Before we begin, I should note that Mr. Thompson has been invited, but has not yet arrived. That's deliberate, I replied, opening my portfolio. The information I'm about to present concerns Mr. Thompson's financial activities over the past 7 years. Given the nature of these discoveries, I felt it prudent to brief the board first, without his presence. A murmur ran through the room. Martin, seated beside me, distributed copies of the key documents Vanessa had provided, along with additional analysis his team had prepared overnight. Gentlemen, I began, what you're looking at represents years of systematic financial misconduct by your CEO, funds diverted from company accounts, project budgets manipulated to create slush funds, profits hidden from both corporate accounting and tax authorities. I paused, allowing them time to scan the first few pages. This isn't a minor accounting discrepancy. This is fraud on a scale that places Meridian's entire financial standing and reputation at risk. The next 2 hours were consumed by detailed examination of the evidence, questions about sources and verification, and increasingly grim assessments of potential liability. Throughout the discussion, I remained composed, answering precisely, referring to documentation rather than conjecture. How did you come by this information, Mrs. Thompson? Griffin asked finally, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. The initial documents were provided by a third party who discovered irregularities, I replied carefully, honoring my implicit promise to Vanessa. My legal team then conducted independent verification, including tracing fund movements through various shell companies identified in those documents. And you're certain of the accuracy? This isn't some forgery created to damage your husband amid divorce proceedings. The documentation stands on its own merits, Martin interjected smoothly. Bank transfers don't lie, and these records have been authenticated by forensic accounting specialists. But more importantly, they can be independently verified by the board's own auditors, We encourage you to do so immediately." Griffin exchanged glances with the other board members, a silent communication passing between them. "Mrs. Thompson, would you mind stepping out briefly while we discuss next steps among ourselves?" I nodded, gathering my things with deliberate calm. "Of course. I'll be available when you're ready to continue." In the hallway outside the boardroom, I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the wall. The magnitude of what I had just set in motion washed over me in waves. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about the future of a company that employed hundreds of people, that contributed significantly to the region's development, that represented a substantial portion of my own financial security. And yet, I felt no hesitation, no doubt about my course of action. Some transgressions required exposure, regardless of collateral consequences. James's betrayal had extended far beyond our marriage, affecting shareholders, employees, and business partners who had trusted his leadership. That trust had been misplaced, and the truth, however painful, was necessary correction. I was still standing there, lost in thought, when the elevator doors opened and James stepped out. He froze when he saw me, his expression cycling rapidly, from surprise to wariness to tightly controlled anger. "Eleanor," he said stiffly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Evidently not," I replied. "Otherwise you might have arrived on time for the meeting." His eyes narrowed. "What meeting? What are you talking about?" "The emergency board meeting, called less than an hour ago." I watched understanding dawn across his features. "But then, you've been rather difficult to reach since yesterday." "Afternoon, I understand." "What have you done?" he demanded, lowering his voice and stepping closer. "If this is about the divorce, targeting my professional standing is beyond the pale, even for you." "This has nothing to do with our divorce," I replied evenly. "This is about financial impropriety that places the entire company at risk. The board deserved to know." The blood drained from his face. "What are you talking about? What so-called impropriety?" Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened and Griffin emerged. His expression grave, he registered James's presence, with a slight stiffening of his shoulders. "James," he acknowledged tersely, "you've arrived. Good. The board requires your immediate presence." James looked from Griffin to me, alarm visibly mounting. "Walter, whatever she's told you, now is not the time, James." Griffin cut him off. "We have serious matters to discuss, and we've already waited longer than prudence dictates." He turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for bringing this situation to our attention. My assistant will see you out. We'll be in touch regarding next steps." I nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was, not a rejection of my evidence, but a necessary separation as they confronted their CEO with what I had revealed. "Of course. Good day, gentlemen." As I walked toward the elevator, I heard James's voice rising behind me, the controlled facade cracking into desperate protestations. "This is a setup, Walter. A vindictive attack by a wife seeking leverage in divorce proceedings. Whatever she showed you, it's manipulated, taken out of context." The elevator doors closed, cutting off his increasingly frantic denials. I descended, 30 floors in perfect silence, my reflection in the mirrored walls revealing a woman I barely recognized. Poised, resolute, unburdened by the weight of secrets kept too long. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the plaza in golden light. I paused, tilting my face toward its warmth, allowing myself a moment to simply breathe. Whatever came next, the messy aftermath of James's exposure, the inevitable legal proceedings, the reshaping of both our lives, I would face it standing firmly in my own truth. For the first time in decades, that seemed not just possible, but inevitable. My phone chimed with a text from Catherine. "Well, how did it go?" I smiled, typing. My response with steady fingers. "Better than expected. Worse than imagined. Exactly as necessary." The aftermath of the board meeting unfolded with stunning rapidity. By evening, James had been placed on administrative leave pending full investigation. By the following morning, forensic accountants had descended on Meridian's headquarters, combing through financial records with meticulous precision. By week's end, the Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a formal inquiry into the company's practices under James's leadership. I watched these developments from a careful distance, neither gloating nor intervening. The mechanisms of corporate accountability, once engaged, operated according to their own momentum. My role had been catalyst, not executioner. Emily flew home that weekend, arriving at my door with shadows under her eyes and questions that couldn't be answered, in brief phone conversations. "Dad's not responding to my calls," she said as we sat in the kitchen, steam rising from mugs of tea between us. "His assistant just says he's unavailable, that he'll contact family when he can." I nodded, unsurprised. He's likely on advice of counsel. Once federal agencies become involved, lawyers typically restrict all communications. Emily studied me across the table, her gaze disconcertingly like James's in its intensity, though without his calculating edge. "The news reports are saying it's bad, Mom. Securities fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They're using terms like criminal charges and significant jail time." "I know." I cupped my hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its solidity. "The evidence is substantial and spans many years. There's no easy explanation that would mitigate what he's done. Did you know, before all this?" I met her eyes directly. "About the financial misconduct? No. That came as a shock to me too. I knew James could be selfish, deceptive in personal matters, but I never imagined he would risk his professional legacy through corporate fraud." Emily pressed her fingers to her temples, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood frustrations that my heart constricted. "I keep trying to reconcile the father I thought I knew with this, the affairs, the financial crimes, trying to push you out of your own home. It's like discovering he's been wearing a mask my entire life." "People are complex, sweetheart," I said gently. "Your father loves you in his way. That hasn't changed. But he's also made choices that reflect profound character flaws, choices with consequences he can no longer avoid." "I just don't understand why," she whispered. "He had everything. Successful career, beautiful home, family who loved him. Why risk it all? For what?" It was the question I had asked myself repeatedly since Vanessa delivered those damning documents. Why had James, with all his advantages, felt compelled to cheat and steal? What void was he trying to fill with deception and illicit gain? "I don't know," I admitted. "Perhaps it was never about having enough. Some people are driven by acquisition itself, of money, power, validation. The having matters less than the getting." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. "What happens now? To the company? To your investment in it?" "Meridian will survive, though not unscathed. The board is cooperating fully with investigators, which should help mitigate institutional penalties. They'll appoint interim leadership, implement stronger oversight, perhaps eventually rebrand." I sipped my tea. "As for my shares, their value has taken a significant hit in the short term, but the company's underlying assets and project portfolio remain strong. In time, proper management can restore its reputation and value." "And the divorce?" Emily asked, her voice smaller now. "Is that still happening, even with everything else going on?" "Yes," I replied simply. "The end of my marriage to your father was decided the moment he moved another woman into this house without my knowledge or consent. The financial revelations that followed only confirmed that a clean break is necessary." I reached across the table to take her hand. "But that has nothing to do with you, Emily. You don't have to choose sides or manage our relationship with each other." You can love your father and support him through this crisis while still accepting my decision to end the marriage. She squeezed my fingers, tears welling. I'm trying, Mom. It's just a lot to process at once. I know, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. After Emily returned to Chicago 2 days later, promising to visit again soon, the house felt achingly empty. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture, straightening pictures, adjusting curtains, seeking purpose in small actions while larger changes swirled around me. The divorce proceedings advanced with mechanical precision. James, facing potential criminal charges and professional disgrace, offered little resistance to my terms. His new attorney, Hamilton having withdrawn from the case citing irreconcilable differences in approach, proposed a settlement that acknowledged my separate ownership of the house and trust assets, requesting only his personal belongings, and a modest percentage of joint accounts acquired during our marriage. He's being surprisingly reasonable, Martin observed when we reviewed the proposal. I'd expected a more aggressive stance, given his character. He's preserving resources for his legal defense, I replied, and perhaps recognizing that fighting me on financial terms while facing federal charges for financial crimes would play poorly with prosecutors and judges alike. Martin nodded. Strategic, if nothing else. Do you want to counter? I considered briefly, then shook my head. No, his terms are acceptable. I have no desire to extract further concessions from someone already facing significant consequences. Let's finalize the agreement and move forward. 3 days later, I signed the divorce papers in Martin's office, ending 35 years of marriage with a series of methodical signatures. The process was anticlimactic. No dramatic confrontations, no tearful recriminations, just the quiet scratching of pen on paper and the soft thud of a notary's seal making it official. Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell, Martin said when we finished, reverting to my maiden name as I'd requested in the filing. You're now legally single. I smiled at the term, finding it curiously apt. Single, not just unmarried, but unified within myself, no longer divided by the compromises and accommodations that had fragmented my identity for decades. Thank you, Martin, for everything. That evening, I opened the French doors to the garden and sat watching twilight descend over the carefully tended flower beds. The roses I'd planted years ago were blooming, their fragrance carrying on the gentle breeze. Inside, the house was quiet, purged of James's presence. I had rearranged furniture, replaced the bedding, hung new artwork, small changes that cumulatively transformed the space, making it undeniably mine. My phone rang, interrupting the peaceful moment. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Eleanor? A voice I hadn't heard in weeks. It's Vanessa Carson. I sat straighter, surprise rippling through me. Vanessa, I didn't expect to hear from you again. I know, she replied, her tone apologetic. I wouldn't have called, but there's something. You should know, something important. I'm listening. She took an audible breath. I've been contacted by federal investigators about the documents I provided you. They want me to testify about how I discovered the financial irregularities and my relationship with James. That's not unexpected, I said carefully. Your evidence forms the foundation of their case. Yes, but there's more. She paused. James reached out to me yesterday. He wants to meet, says he has a proposition that could benefit us both. His exact words. Cold apprehension trickled down my spine. You haven't agreed to meet him, have you? No, she replied firmly. But I recorded the call. He implied that if I were to recant my statements, claim the documents were falsified or misunderstood, he could make it extremely worth my while. He mentioned offshore accounts that investigators don't know about yet. I closed my eyes briefly, unsurprised, yet still disappointed by James's attempted manipulation. You're telling me this because I'm turning the recording. Over to the FBI, Vanessa said simply. And I thought you should know before it happens. This will almost certainly eliminate any chance of a plea deal for him. The prosecution will view it as witness tampering on top of everything else. The implications were clear. Without a plea arrangement, James would likely face trial and, given the mounting evidence, a substantial prison sentence. The public spectacle would be unavoidable, the damage to both his reputation and Emily's peace of mind severe. I understand, I said finally. Thank you for the courtesy of advance notice. There's one more thing, Vanessa added, her voice softening. I'm leaving the country for a while. I've been offered a photography assignment in Southeast Asia, a book project documenting traditional craftsmanship across the region. I'll be gone at least a year. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. It is, she agreed, but it also means I'll be unavailable for much of the legal proceedings. I've given my sworn statements and submitted all evidence to the authorities. They'll have to proceed without my direct testimony. I understood what she wasn't explicitly saying, that her departure, while professionally motivated, also served to distance her from the maelstrom surrounding James. I couldn't blame her for that choice. I wish you well, Vanessa, I said sincerely, and thank you for your honesty throughout this difficult situation. You deserved nothing less, she replied. Goodbye, Eleanor. After she hung up, I remained in the garden until darkness fell, completely, contemplating what her news meant for James's future, for Emily's emotional well-being, for my own path forward. The complexity of interconnected consequences stretched before me like a vast, intricate web, each strand vibrating with potential repercussions. I had set truth in motion by confronting James about his affair, by refusing to leave my own home, by revealing his financial crimes to the board. Now truth would follow its own inexorable course, beyond my control or moderation. All I could do was stand firmly in my own integrity and help those I loved navigate the aftermath as best I could. The following morning brought news that James had been formally indicted on 17 counts of securities fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. His bail was set at $5 million, a sum he could no longer easily access with his assets frozen and accounts under scrutiny. Emily called, distraught. Dad's attorney reached out. He can't make bail without help. He's asked if I can post my condo as collateral. My heart sank. Oh, Emily, that's an impossible position for him to put you in. I know, she said, voice thick with tears. But he's my father. How can I let him stay in jail if I have the means to help? Sweetheart, listen to me, I said carefully. Your condo represents your financial security, the fruit of your hard work and careful saving. If you use it to secure his bail and he violates the terms of release, which, given his recent behavior, is a significant risk, you would lose everything. So I'm just supposed to abandon him? When he needs me most? I sighed, weighing my words. There's a difference between abandonment and enabling. Supporting your father emotionally through this crisis is appropriate. Risking your financial future to protect him from the consequences of his own actions is not. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice steadier. You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to say no when he sounds so desperate. Of course it is. He's counting on that, on your love and loyalty overriding your judgment. But love doesn't require sacrifice of your own well-being, not even for a parent. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, a decision crystallizing within me. I had protected my own assets carefully throughout this process, creating appropriate boundaries between James's situation and my financial security. But I had resources beyond what I needed for myself, and Emily was carrying an emotional burden that no child should bear alone. I called Martin. I want to establish a legal defense. Fund for James, I said without preamble. Sufficient to ensure competent representation, but structured so that the money goes directly to approved attorneys, not to James himself. Martin's surprise was audible. May I ask why? After everything he's done? Not for him, I clarified. For Emily. She shouldn't have to choose between her father's welfare and her own financial security. This removes that impossible dilemma from her shoulders. I see, Martin replied, understanding dawning in his voice. That's remarkably generous given the circumstances. It's not generosity, I corrected gently. It's pragmatism. James will face justice regardless of legal representation quality. This just ensures the process is fair, which benefits everyone in the long run. The fund was established by the end of the day, with strict parameters governing its use. I notified James's attorney directly, specifying that Emily was to be told only that alternative arrangements had been made for his defense, without my name attached to the solution. 2 days later, James was released on bail, his movements restricted by an electronic monitor, his passport surrendered to authorities. He took residence in a modest apartment across town, far from the luxurious surroundings he had once considered his entitlement. I didn't see him, though I heard from mutual acquaintances that he appeared haggard, diminished by circumstances and uncertainty. Part of me, a small vindictive part I wasn't proud of, felt satisfaction in this reversal of fortune. The larger part felt only sadness for the waste of potential, the squandering of what might have been a legacy of genuine achievement rather than disgrace. Summer arrived with unexpected intensity, bringing record heat that baked the city and drove residents indoors to air-conditioned sanctuary. I spent mornings in the garden, tending plants before the sun climbed too high, then retreated to the coolness of the house to work on a project that had gradually consumed my creative energy, redesigning the East Wing into a proper architect's studio. For the first time in decades, I was drafting again. Not just modest renovations or landscape suggestions, but genuine architectural concepts. The muscle memory returned with surprising ease, my hand remembering curves and angles, proportions, and relationships that had once been second nature. I started small, sketching modifications to the guest house, now purged of its brief association with Vanessa, repurposed as a potential workspace. Then I expanded to neighborhood improvement concepts, urban pocket parks, community gathering, spaces. Without conscious intent, I found myself designing solutions to problems I had observed for years, but never believed I had license to address. Catherine visited in July, bringing East Coast sophistication and sisterly candor to disrupt my emerging routines. You're different, she observed on her second evening as we shared wine on the patio, ceiling fans stirring the heavy air above us. More centered, less concerned with how things appear and more with how they actually are. I smiled, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Necessity has a way of clarifying priorities. It's more than that, she insisted. You're creating again, generating rather than just maintaining. She gestured toward the sketches I'd been showing her earlier. These designs are remarkable, Ellie. You never lost your eye or your instincts. Just my confidence, I acknowledged, swirling wine in my glass. And my belief that my creative vision mattered as much as James's career ambitions. Catherine leaned forward, her expression intent. So what now? You've reclaimed your home, your financial independence, your creative voice. What's the next chapter of Eleanor Mitchell's story? The question lingered between us, both challenging and liberating. What did come next, now that I was unbound from patterns established over 35 years of marriage? The possibilities stretched before me, daunting in their vastness, yet exhilarating in their potential. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, but for the first time in decades, I'm excited to find out. The next morning, an unexpected call disrupted my coffee ritual. The number displayed on my phone belonged to Walter Griffin, Meridian's board, chairman. Eleanor, he greeted me, his voice warmer than our professional relationship warranted. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Walter. What can I do for you? He cleared his throat. The board would like to meet with you next week, in an official capacity. I frowned slightly. Regarding my shareholder status, I've been quite clear that I have no intention of divesting my ownership stake despite recent events. No, he hastened to assure me. Nothing like that. In fact, quite the opposite. He paused. We'd like to discuss a potential role for you within the company leadership structure. The coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Excuse me? The situation is this, Griffin continued, his tone shifting to business precision. The criminal proceedings against James will continue for some time, regardless of whether he eventually accepts a plea arrangement. During this period, and likely permanently thereafter, Meridian requires stable leadership with a clear vision for ethical operation and public trust restoration. And you think I'm part of that solution? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Walter, with all due respect, I've never held a corporate position. My professional background is in architecture, not business management. We're well aware of your qualifications, Eleanor. Something in his voice suggested he knew more than I'd expected about my background. Including your architectural training at Princeton, the fellowship offers you declined early in your marriage, and the substantial role you played in Meridian's survival during key financial crises, support that went far beyond passive investment. I sat back, surprised by the depth of his knowledge. You've been doing research. Due diligence, he corrected smoothly. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to identify the best leadership path forward. Your combination of significant ownership stake, intimate knowledge of the company's history and projects, and, frankly, your irreproachable ethical standing make you uniquely valuable at this juncture. What exactly are you proposing, Walter? Initially, we'd like you to join the Executive Restructuring Committee, the team charged with rebuilding Meridian's operational integrity and public image. Eventually, depending on your interest and the committee's progress, there might be discussion of a more permanent executive role. I fell silent, absorbing the unexpected proposal. After 35 years of having my professional capabilities dismissed or minimized by James, the irony of being invited into leadership of the very company he had built, and nearly destroyed, was almost too perfect. This isn't about revenge, Eleanor, Griffin said softly, interpreting my silence correctly. It's about harnessing the right combination of company knowledge, ethical foundation, and creative vision to save an enterprise that employs hundreds and contributes significantly to our region's development. Your architecture background is actually an asset in that context, not a limitation. I'll need time to consider this, I replied finally. It represents a significant shift from the direction I've been moving since the divorce. Of course. He agreed readily. The meeting next week would be exploratory, not conclusive, an opportunity to discuss possibilities, nothing more. After we hung up, I walked through the house to my newly established studio, where morning light streamed through east-facing windows, illuminating drafting tables and concept boards. The space represented a reconnection with my original professional identity, a return to creative work I had sacrificed decades ago. Would accepting Griffin's invitation mean abandoning this reclamation just as it was beginning? Or could it represent an unexpected integration, a way to bring architectural vision into corporate leadership, redesigning not just physical spaces but organizational structures and ethical frameworks? I had no immediate answer, only questions that required careful consideration. Perhaps that uncertainty itself was progress, evidence that I was now making choices based on comprehensive evaluation rather than accommodating others' expectations. The remainder of the day passed in contemplative productivity. I worked on design concepts, consulted with a contractor about studio equipment installation, prepared dinner with ingredients from my garden. Throughout these ordinary activities, Griffin's proposal hovered at the edges of my awareness. neither embraced nor rejected, simply acknowledged as an unexpected fork in a path I was still discovering. That evening, as twilight softened the garden's edges, my phone rang again. Emily, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Dad took a plea deal," she said without preamble. 6 years with possibility of parole after 4, substantial financial penalties, cooperation with ongoing investigations. I exhaled slowly, relief and sadness mingling. That's better than it might have been, given the extent of the charges. Yes, she agreed. His attorney says without the deal he was looking at 12 to 15 years minimum. She paused. He wanted me to thank whoever established his defense fund. Said it made all the difference in securing competent representation. Heat rose to my cheeks, unexpected emotion catching me off guard. I'm sure many people contributed, I deflected gently. Friends, business associates who remembered his better qualities. Emily's silence suggested she suspected the truth, but wouldn't press the issue. He's being sentenced next month. He asked if you would consider attending. For closure, he said. The request surprised me. Did he actually use the word closure? More or less, Emily replied. His exact words were, "I'd like to see her." Once more before I go away, to end things properly this time. I considered the request, weighing complex emotions. James and I had already ended our marriage through legal channels, without direct confrontation. Did we need another opportunity? For goodbye? Would his sentencing, a public ceremony of accountability, provide healing or simply reopen wounds better left to close on their own? I'll think about it, I told Emily, unwilling to commit either way in the moment. How are you feeling about all this? Relieved, mostly, she admitted. The waiting and uncertainty have been excruciating. At least now there's a defined timeline, a concrete reality to adapt to. She sighed. 6 years seems simultaneously forever and not long enough, you know. Forever in terms of missing his presence in my life, not long enough for the magnitude of what he did. Justice rarely feels completely satisfying, I observed. But perhaps that's appropriate. Clean, uncomplicated resolutions belong to fiction, not real life with all its messy contradictions. When did you get so wise, Mom? Emily asked, a smile finally warming her voice. Around the time I stopped pretending I had all the answers, I replied honestly. Wisdom begins with admitting how much we don't know, I think. After we hung up, I returned to the garden, watching stars emerge in the deepening blue overhead. The evening carried a sense of transition. One chapter conclusively ending with James's plea agreement, new possibilities emerging with Griffin's unexpected invitation. For 35 years, I had defined myself primarily through my marriage, subordinating my ambitions and identity to James's needs and expectations. Now, standing in the garden of a house that had always been mine, surrounded by plants I had selected and nurtured, I recognized that the path forward was entirely self-determined. Whether I attended James's sentencing, whether I joined Meridian's restructuring committee, whether I pursued architecture professionally again, these decisions would be made according to my own values and desires, not in reaction to or accommodation of someone else's expectations. The realization brought neither triumph nor bitterness, only a profound sense of rightness. At 63, I had finally stepped fully into my own authority, not as James Thompson's wife, not as Emily's mother, but as Eleanor Mitchell, architect, of my own life. The garden enfolded me in nighttime fragrances, jasmine, evening primrose, the lingering sweetness of roses. Overhead, stars wheeled in ancient patterns, indifferent to human dramas, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with summer air, my mind with possibilities, my heart with the quiet certainty that whatever came next would be authentically mine. I decided to attend James's sentencing after all, not for his benefit, nor, even for Emily's, but for my own sense of completion. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, wood-paneled and austere, with uncomfortable benches that filled quickly with journalists, former colleagues, and the morbidly curious. I sat near the back, wearing a simple navy dress and minimal jewelry, determined to remain inconspicuous. Emily arrived moments before proceedings began, sliding into the space I'd saved beside me. She squeezed my hand wordlessly, her face pale, but composed. We had spoken at length the night before, agreeing that our presence was neither endorsement nor condemnation, but simple witness to a necessary conclusion. When James entered, escorted by his attorney, I barely recognized him. 3 months of legal proceedings had transformed the confident executive into a diminished figure, his shoulders hunched beneath an ill-fitting suit, his once commanding presence reduced to cautious, measured movements. He scanned the courtroom briefly, his gaze finding Emily, then me, before focusing resolutely forward. The proceedings themselves were brief and procedural. The judge, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the plea agreement in clinical terms. She addressed James directly before pronouncing sentence, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Mr. Thompson, your crimes represent a profound breach of trust, not just of securities laws or tax regulations, but of the fundamental covenant between business leaders and those who rely upon their integrity. Employees trusted you with their livelihoods, investors with their financial futures, communities with their economic development. You violated that trust systematically and repeatedly over many years." She paused, studying him over reading glasses. "While the court acknowledges your eventual acceptance of responsibility through this plea agreement, it also recognizes that this acceptance came only after overwhelming evidence made denial untenable. This suggests calculation rather than genuine remorse." James stood motionless, his attorney's hand at his elbow as the judge continued. "The agreed sentence of 72 months in federal custody, with eligibility for parole after 48 months, reflects both the severity of your offenses and your cooperation with ongoing investigations. It is the court's hope that this period of incarceration provides opportunity for genuine reflection on the values that guided your decisions, and perhaps reconstruction of a moral framework that places integrity above personal gain." With that, she pronounced the sentence officially, adding details about surrender date, facility assignment, and financial restitution terms. The sharp crack of her gavel marked the formal end of James Thompson's life as he had known it, and perhaps the conclusive period on a chapter of my own. Emily's fingers tightened around mine as court officers approached James. He turned toward us, eyes seeking contact. Emily raised her hand in a small wave. I met his gaze steadily, neither hostile nor compassionate, simply present. He nodded once in acknowledgement before being led away. We didn't speak until we reached the courthouse steps, where afternoon, sunlight and the distant sound of traffic created jarring contrast with the somber proceedings we'd just witnessed. "Are you okay?" I asked Emily, noting the tension in her shoulders, the tight line of her mouth. "I think so," she replied, blinking. Against the brightness, it was final, in a way that even the verdict wasn't. She turned to me, searching my face. "How about you? You were married to him for 35 years. This can't be easy, no matter the circumstances." I considered her question carefully, taking inventory of my emotional state. "I feel clear," I said finally, as if a persistent background noise has finally stopped, allowing me to hear my own thoughts without distortion. Emily nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back to work. My flight to Chicago leaves tonight." "Of course. Let me drive you to your office." In the car, Emily broke our reflective silence. "Dad's attorney mentioned that you established the defense fund, that it was entirely your money, not contributions from various associates like you implied." Heat rose to my cheeks. He shouldn't have told you that. Why did you do it? Emily's voice held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. After everything he put you through, why ensure he had the best possible defense? I kept my eyes on the road, gathering thoughts that felt complex yet ultimately simple. Partly for you, so you wouldn't feel torn between helping him and protecting yourself. Partly because justice functions best when both sides have competent representation. I paused, finding the deeper truth. And partly because 35 years of marriage, even a flawed one, creates an irreducible connection. I could divorce James, expose his crimes, reclaim my independence, but I couldn't wish for his utter destruction without diminishing something in myself. Emily was quiet for several moments. Then, "You're extraordinary, Mom. Not just strong, but genuinely decent in ways I'm still learning to appreciate." Her words settled in my chest like a warm stone, healing places I hadn't realized were still tender. I'm just trying to navigate complicated situations with whatever wisdom I've managed to accumulate over 63 years, I demurred. Some days more successfully than others. We parted at her office building with tight hugs and promises to talk soon. As I drove away, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness exactly, but unburdening. James's sentencing represented the final severance of practical entanglements between us. Whatever wounds remained were internal matters for private healing, not legal or financial complications requiring external resolution. The following week, I met with Meridian's board as Walter Griffin had requested. The conference room on the HIA 32nd floor offered spectacular views of the city skyline, a landscape James had helped shape through decades of development projects, some visionary, others merely profitable. 8 board members greeted me with cautious cordiality, their earlier suspicion replaced by guarded respect. I recognized the shift for what it was, not personal regard, but pragmatic reassessment of my potential value to their beleaguered company. "Eleanor," Griffin began once pleasantries had been exchanged, "thank you for joining us today. As discussed, we're interested in exploring potential roles for you in Meridian's restructuring and future leadership." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The situation is this," he explained, gesturing toward charts displayed on a screen at the room's end. "Meridian's stock has stabilized following the initial shock of James's arrest and the subsequent investigations. Our core business remains sound, our project pipeline robust. But public trust has been severely damaged, and internal morale is suffering." Another board member, Patricia Winters, picked up the thread. "We need leadership that represents both continuity and ethical renewal, someone familiar with Meridian's operations but untainted by association with the financial improprieties." She focused her sharp gaze on me. "Your unique position as significant shareholder with intimate knowledge of the company, combined with your public stance against the fraudulent activities, makes you an ideal candidate for a senior advisory role, with potential for more direct leadership involvement depending on outcomes." I listened attentively, noting both what was said and what remained tactfully unspoken. They wanted to leverage my moral credibility and company knowledge without ceding actual control. The proposed advisory position would give me influence without authority, a familiar arrangement for women of my generation. When they concluded their presentation, all eyes turned expectantly toward me. I took a measured breath before responding. "I appreciate your confidence and the careful consideration you've given this proposal," I began. "Meridian has been part of my life for over 3 decades, albeit in ways not always visible or acknowledged. I have a vested interest in seeing the company recover and flourish." Heads nodded around the table, relieved by my apparent receptiveness. "However," I continued, noting how their expressions instantly shifted to wariness, "I believe the role you're describing undervalues what I can contribute while overestimating my willingness to serve in a primarily symbolic capacity." Griffin frowned slightly. I'm not sure I follow, Eleanor. We're offering a seat at the executive table. Influence over major decisions during a critical restructuring period. Influence without authority, I clarified. Advisory status without actual decision-making power. My value, as you've presented it, lies primarily in the perception of ethical oversight rather than substantive leadership contribution. Uncomfortable. Glances circulated among board members. Patricia Winters leaned forward, her tone carefully modulated. What would you consider an appropriate role, then? Bearing in mind your limited direct experience in corporate management. I smiled, appreciating her directness. My proposal is straightforward. I'll join Meridian's executive team as Chief Development Officer, with full authority over project selection, design integrity, and community engagement. My architectural background, combined with my intimate knowledge of Meridian's history and operations, makes me uniquely qualified to rebuild public trust through demonstrably ethical and innovative development practices. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the building's environmental systems. Griffin recovered first, his businessman's instincts engaging with the unexpected counteroffer. Chief Development Officer, he repeated slowly. That's a substantial position, traditionally held by someone with extensive industry experience and established relationships with municipal authorities, contractors, investment partners. All relationships cultivated and maintained by James, I pointed out. Relationships now potentially compromised by association with his fraudulent activities. Perhaps fresh perspectives and untainted leadership are precisely what's needed in that domain. Patricia Winters studied me with newfound interest. You've clearly given this considerable thought, Eleanor. This isn't an impulsive response to our offer. No, I confirmed. It's a carefully considered proposal based on realistic assessment of my capabilities, Meridian's needs, and the unique opportunity this crisis presents to fundamentally reimagine the company's approach to development. And if we decline? Griffin asked. If the board feels your proposal exceeds what we're comfortable offering at this juncture? I maintained my composure, though my heart accelerated slightly. Then I'll decline your advisory role and continue focusing on my independent architectural projects. My shares in Meridian will remain intact. My interest in the company's governance active but exercised through normal shareholder channels. I paused deliberately. And the board will have missed an opportunity to demonstrate genuine commitment to transformative change rather than cosmetic rehabilitation. The implications hung unspoken in the air, that without substantive leadership changes, Meridian would struggle to convince skeptical stakeholders, regulators, and community partners that the company had truly moved beyond James's era of deception. Griffin signaled for a brief recess, and board members retreated to a separate room for private consultation. I remained seated, gazing out at the city spread below. From this height, individual buildings blended into districts into neighborhoods, all interconnected by visible and invisible systems, transportation networks, utility infrastructure, economic relationships, social patterns. The architecture of community, tangible and conceptual. It was this perspective that I could bring to Meridian, understanding development not merely as construction projects or profit centers, but as interventions in living systems, with ethical implications extending far beyond balance sheets or quarterly reports. 20 minutes later, the board members returned, their expressions carefully neutral as they resumed their seats. Griffin cleared his throat, his gaze meeting mine directly. The board has considered your counterproposal, Eleanor. While we have reservations about appointing someone without traditional industry credentials to such a senior position, we also recognize the unique circumstances facing Meridian at this juncture. He paused, seeming to choose his next words with precision. We're prepared to offer you the position of Chief Development Officer on a provisional basis, 6 months, with performance review and board confirmation required for permanent appointment. I nodded, recognizing both the opportunity and the challenge embedded in these terms. I accept those conditions with one addition: complete autonomy in assembling my immediate team. If I'm to deliver meaningful results within 6 months, I'll need collaborators who share my vision and work ethic. Patricia Winters smiled thinly. Reasonable, though the board retains final approval on executive compensation packages. Of course, I agreed. I understand corporate governance requirements. And so, at 63, I stepped into corporate leadership at the very company where I had once been merely James's wife. The pleasant companion at holiday parties, the gracious hostess for client dinners, the supportive spouse who had sacrificed her own career ambitions to facilitate his success. The irony was not lost on me, nor on the company's employees, many of whom regarded my appointment with understandable skepticism. What qualifications did the disgraced CEO's ex-wife bring to such a critical position during corporate crisis? Was this merely nepotism in reverse, or symbolic gesture without substance? I addressed these questions directly at my first all-hands meeting, standing before hundreds of uncertain faces in Meridian's main auditorium. Many of you know me only as James Thompson's wife of 35 years, I began, deliberately using his name rather than avoiding it. Others may recognize me from company functions or charity events. Few of you know that I hold a master's degree in architecture from Princeton, that I was offered prestigious fellowships early in my career, or that I've maintained active interest and involvement in architectural trends and urban development theory throughout my adult life. I paused, scanning the audience. Even fewer know that I've been a significant Meridian shareholder for decades, or that my investment helped stabilize the company during several financial challenges. This information wasn't secret, but it wasn't publicized either. A pattern that reflected broader issues of transparency within Meridian's culture. The room had grown utterly still, employees leaning forward slightly, executive team members seated in the front row, watching with expressions ranging from wariness to curiosity. I accept this position not as James Thompson's ex-wife, but as Eleanor Mitchell, architect and investor with direct stake in Meridian's ethical rehabilitation and future success. I bring fresh perspective, creative vision, and unwavering commitment to transparent operation. My provisional appointment gives you and the board 6 months to evaluate whether those qualities outweigh my unconventional career path. I smiled slightly. I intend to make that evaluation straightforward by delivering measurable improvements in project selection, design integrity, and community engagement. The weeks that followed tested my resolve and capabilities in ways I hadn't experienced since early motherhood. 14-hour days became normal as I immersed myself in Meridian's operations, project pipeline, financial structures, and organizational dynamics. I interviewed dozens of employees at all levels, seeking unfiltered perspectives on company strengths and weaknesses. I reviewed every active and pending project, assessing not just profitability metrics, but ethical implications and community impact. Most challenging was assembling my core team, professionals who combined technical expertise with ethical commitment and willingness to serve under untested leadership during corporate crisis. I needed individuals secure enough in their capabilities to speak truth, rather than easy agreement, creative enough to reimagine development practices rather than simply repairing damaged systems. Catherine proved unexpectedly helpful in this recruitment effort, leveraging her extensive network to identify candidates with the rare combination of traits I sought. You need people who've already proven they value integrity over expediency, she advised during one of our evening calls. Look for those who've taken career hits for principle. They're your natural allies in this transformation. Following her suggestion, I found my operations director, a former urban planning commissioner, who had resigned rather than approve an environmentally destructive project backed by powerful interests. My community engagement lead came from a nonprofit focused on equitable development practices in marginalized neighborhoods. My financial oversight specialist had previously blown the whistle on accounting irregularities at another development firm, accepting career setback rather than complicity. Together, we began reimagining Meridian's approach to development, not as isolated construction projects, but as integrated contributions to community fabric. We audited existing projects against enhanced ethical standards, identifying opportunities for remediation where practices had prioritized profit over social responsibility. We established transparent reporting mechanisms for every aspect of operations, making accountability structural rather than aspirational. Most significantly, we initiated what we called the Legacy Project, a comprehensive review of all developments completed under James's leadership, identifying those where corners had been cut, regulations skirted, or community input ignored. Where problems were discovered, we developed remediation plans, allocating funds from a specially established account to address deficiencies, upgrade environmental systems, and implement community benefit programs. This is either brilliant or financial suicide, Patricia Winters remarked during one particularly tense board meeting as we presented the projected costs of the Legacy Project. Voluntarily exposing past failures and paying to fix them without legal requirement to do so. It's neither, I replied calmly. It's ethical business practice with sound long-term strategy. By identifying and addressing these issues proactively, we control the narrative, demonstrate substantive change, and rebuild trust with communities and regulatory authorities. The alternative, waiting for problems to emerge through complaints or investigations, would cost more financially and inflict further reputation damage. Griffin, who had initially been my most skeptical overseer, nodded slowly. There's merit in Eleanor's approach. Meridian's position is unique. We're neither bankrupt nor untarnished. This middle ground requires creative strategy to navigate successfully. The board ultimately approved the Legacy Project, though with modified funding parameters and enhanced oversight provisions. I accepted these constraints as reasonable governance rather than interference, recognizing that accountability flowed in multiple directions. As summer transitioned to autumn, my provisional leadership period reached its midpoint. The initial emergency response had evolved into strategic redirection, with measurable progress in both practical operations and public perception. Industry publications began featuring Meridian's restructuring efforts as potential model for ethical rehabilitation. In development sectors, local communities previously hostile to Meridian projects tentatively engaged with our revamped community consultation processes. Emily visited during this period, staying in my home for a long weekend that provided welcome respite from professional intensity. We spent Saturday morning in my garden, harvesting late tomatoes and trimming perennials for winter dormancy. I barely recognized the company Dad built, she remarked, carefully placing ruby red tomatoes in her basket. The Meridian coverage I've been reading sounds nothing like the profit-obsessed operation he used to describe over dinner. I smiled, wiping soil from my gardening gloves. That's intentional. We're fundamentally reimagining what development can mean and how it can operate. Not just sustainable buildings, but sustainable practices, sustainable relationships with communities. I paused, reflecting. In many ways, I'm implementing the vision I had 35 years ago, when architecture still felt like my calling rather than my abandoned path. Emily studied me thoughtfully. Are you happy, Mom, with this unexpected turn your life has taken? The question deserved careful consideration. Was happiness the right framework for evaluating this intensive, challenging, potentially temporary phase of professional engagement? Did the satisfaction of meaningful work equate to happiness in the conventional sense? I'm fulfilled, I said finally. Engaged in work that matters, using capabilities I'd almost forgotten I possessed, contributing to something larger than personal comfort or security. I met her gaze directly. It's not happiness in the uncomplicated sense, but it's deeply satisfying in ways I hadn't experienced for decades. She nodded, understanding. You seem more fully yourself than I can remember seeing you. Even when I was growing up, there was always something held back, a part of you that remained. Carefully contained. She selected another tomato, rolling it gently between her fingers. I didn't recognize it then, but looking back, I can see how much of yourself you set aside to accommodate Dad's expectations and ambitions. Her insight startled me, not for its content, which echoed my own reflections, but for its source. My daughter had observed more clearly than I'd realized, had perceived dynamics I thought successfully masked from her childhood awareness. I made choices I thought necessary at the time, I said carefully. Many women of my generation did. We were taught that compromise was the price of stable family life, that personal ambition was somehow less worthy than supporting others' success. I brushed soil from a particularly perfect tomato. I don't regret prioritizing you in our family life. I only regret letting that choice become total surrender of my own identity and potential. And now? Emily asked. What happens when your provisional appointment ends? If the board confirms you permanently, will you continue down this corporate path? And if they don't, what then? They were questions I'd been asking myself with increasing frequency as the 6-month milestone approached. The work had proven more engaging than I'd anticipated, the impact more meaningful, the personal satisfaction more profound. But it had also consumed my life completely, leaving little space for the independent architectural exploration I'd begun before Meridian's invitation. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me has fallen in love with this unexpected opportunity to implement ideas I've carried for decades. Another part craves the creative independence I was just beginning to reclaim. I smiled ruefully. Perhaps, at 63, I'm finally facing the work-life balance dilemmas that younger women navigate routinely now. Emily laughed. Better late than never. And unlike most working women, you actually have financial freedom to choose based on fulfillment rather than necessity. True, I acknowledged. Another unexpected gift from Uncle Richard's foresight. As October yielded to November, bringing crisp mornings and spectacular foliage to the city's parks, the board scheduled my formal performance review. 6 months had passed with remarkable speed, the provisional period concluding with comprehensive evaluation of metrics established at appointment. I prepared methodically, compiling quantitative data on project improvements, financial stabilization, regulatory compliance, and community engagement. More challenging was articulating the qualitative transformation in company culture, the shift from profit at all costs mentality to integrated vision of development as community stewardship. The review session itself, held in the same 30-second floor conference room where I had countered their initial offer months earlier, stretched for nearly 4 hours. Board members probed every aspect of my leadership: decisions made, priorities established, resources allocated, relationships cultivated. They examined financial projections, stakeholder feedback, employee satisfaction surveys, media coverage assessments. Throughout the intensive questioning, I maintained composed transparency, acknowledging both successes and continuing challenges, outlining plans for addressing persistent issues while building on established progress. I neither apologized for unconventional approaches nor claimed premature victory in Meridian's rehabilitation. When their questions finally exhausted, Griffin requested that I step out while the board deliberated. I gathered my materials calmly, thanked them for their thorough engagement, and exited to a small waiting room with sweeping views of the city's western neighborhoods. Standing at the window, watching afternoon light gild autumn trees in a park. Below, I realized with mild surprise that I felt genuine equanimity about the pending decision. Whether they confirmed my appointment or concluded my tenure, the past 6 months had reawakened professional capabilities and personal confidence. That would serve me well in whatever came next. The board's judgment, while consequentially significant, wasn't existentially defining. This realization itself represented profound growth. evidence that I had finally internalized the independence I had legally claimed through divorce, had emotionally embraced the self-determination that financial security made possible. At 63, I had become the author of my own story rather than supporting character in someone else's narrative. The conference room door opened behind me, and Griffin appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, we're ready for you now." I followed him back into the room, taking the seat indicated at the head of the conference table rather than the side position I'd occupied during questioning. This small adjustment in physical positioning seemed telling, though I restrained premature interpretation. Griffin remained standing, hands resting lightly on his chair back. "The board has completed its evaluation of your provisional leadership period, reviewing both quantitative metrics and qualitative assessments from various stakeholders." He paused, glancing around at colleagues who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We've reached unanimous decision regarding your future role with Meridian." I met his gaze steadily, prepared for either outcome, centered in my own worth regardless of their determination. "Eleanor Mitchell," he continued, formal tone contrasting with the hint of a smile now visible at the corners of his mouth. "We are pleased to confirm your appointment as Chief Development Officer on a permanent basis, with expanded scope to include strategic planning and ethical oversight across all company divisions." Relief and satisfaction washed through me, not because external validation was necessary for my sense of accomplishment, but because this decision allowed continuation of meaningful work just reaching its stride. "Thank you for your confidence," I replied simply. "I look forward to building on foundations established during these initial months." Patricia Winters leaned forward, her usually reserved expression warming slightly. "The board has been genuinely impressed by your performance. Eleanor, you've successfully balanced immediate crisis management with long-term strategic redirection, a difficult combination even for seasoned executives. Most significantly, you've begun reshaping company culture in ways that appear sustainable rather than superficial." Other board members added their own observations, noting community relationship improvements, employee morale stabilization, regulatory authority cooperation, even early indicators of renewed investor confidence. Their acknowledgement felt genuine, rather than perfunctory, assessment grounded in objective observation rather than personal regard. As the meeting concluded with discussion of next phase priorities and reporting expectations, I experienced a moment of clarity so profound it almost manifested physically. A sudden sharpening of perception, as if layers of obscuring film had been stripped from my vision. For 35 years, I had lived in the shadow of James's career, arranging my existence around his ambitions, accepting diminishment of my potential as necessary sacrifice for family stability. Now I occupied the very position from which he had shaped the region's development landscape, not through inheritance of his authority, but through recognition of my distinct capabilities. The irony carried neither bitterness nor triumph, only clear-eyed acknowledgement of life's unexpected trajectories. James now served his sentence in federal prison, while I led rehabilitation of the company he had simultaneously built and undermined. Neither outcome had been imaginable when we stood together on the courthouse steps after our wedding, young and certain of the conventional path our lives would follow. As I gathered my materials to leave, Griffin touched my elbow lightly. 1. More thing, Eleanor. The board has approved establishment of a design innovation division within your department, specifically focused on integrating architectural excellence with community-responsive development. We understand this represents particular interest area for you. I looked up, surprised by this unexpected addition. Yes, absolutely. Thoughtful design is essential to ethical development. But this wasn't in my proposal or our previous discussions. He smiled, more genuinely now. Consider it recognition of your unique background and contribution. Meridian needs not just ethical rehabilitation, but visionary redirection. Your architectural perspective offers exactly that potential. Walking out of Meridian's headquarters that evening, I felt a curious sense of integration, as if fragments of identity long held separate were finally cohering into unified whole. The architect I had trained to become, the corporate wife I had been for decades, the independent woman emerging from divorce, all these aspects now aligned in purposeful direction rather than conflicting with each other. The future stretched before me, neither defined by past limitations nor constrained by conventional expectations. At 63, I had discovered that life's most surprising chapters might still lie ahead, that purpose and meaning remained available, regardless of previous detours or delayed potentials. Above the city, twilight deepened the sky to indigo, first stars appearing like distant possibilities just coming into focus. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with autumn-scented air, my mind with expanding vision of what might yet be created, my heart with quiet certainty that Eleanor Mitchell's story was still very much in progress. 2 years passed with remarkable swiftness. Under my leadership, Meridian transformed from a company shadowed by scandal to an industry leader in ethical development practices. Our legacy project, initially viewed with skepticism by financial analysts, had become a case study in corporate rehabilitation taught at business schools nationwide. More importantly, the communities where we operated began to view Meridian as a genuine partner rather than an exploitative developer. A shift reflected in smoother approval processes, positive media coverage, and improved investment terms. My personal life underwent equally profound evolution. The house that had once felt like a monument to my failed marriage became truly mine, redesigned to reflect my aesthetic preferences and practical needs. The East Wing studio flourished as creative workshop where I developed architectural concepts that increasingly influenced Meridian's projects. My relationship with Emily deepened into adult friendship based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than merely familial obligation. On a crisp spring morning, as cherry blossoms transformed the city's parks into clouds of pale pink, I received the letter I had been both expecting and dreading. James was being released on parole after serving 4 years of his 6-year sentence. His attorney's carefully worded message indicated he would be residing with his sister in a coastal town 3 hours away, had employment arranged through a former colleague's construction business, and would be under standard parole restrictions. The letter concluded with a request that struck me as both audacious and strangely fitting. James wished to meet with me, once settled, to express in person what cannot be adequately conveyed through intermediaries. The attorney emphasized that I was under no obligation to agree, that refusal would be fully respected, that the request itself came only after considerable deliberation. I carried the letter into my garden, settling onto a bench beside blooming tulips, considering my response. The James who had betrayed our marriage, attempted to displace me from my home, committed financial crimes that harmed countless others. That man deserved nothing from me, certainly not the courtesy of personal meeting. But perhaps the James, emerging from prison after 4 years of consequence and reflection, was not precisely the same man who had entered it. Not transformed, necessarily. I harbored no naive expectations about fundamental character revision, but possibly altered, in ways that merited acknowledgement. After consulting with Emily, who had maintained limited contact with her father through intermittent prison visits, I agreed to a meeting. Not at my home, which remained sacrosanct personal space, but at a quiet restaurant on neutral ground. The man who arrived at our designated meeting spot bore little physical resemblance to the James Thompson who had dominated boardrooms and social gatherings throughout our marriage. Prison had aged him visibly, etching deep lines around eyes that had lost their characteristic confidence. The expensive suits and precision haircuts were replaced by simple khakis and button-down shirt that hung loosely on his diminished frame. "Eleanor," he greeted me with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded, neither warm nor hostile. "You're welcome." We ordered coffee, navigating small talk about the restaurant, the weather, the changing cityscape, visible through windows. When these safe topics exhausted themselves, uncomfortable silence settled between us. James cleared his throat. You look well. Better than well, actually. There's something different about you. Life after 65 agrees with me, I replied simply. He nodded, fingers fidgeting with his napkin. I've followed news about Meridian when possible. The company's turnaround is remarkable. Your leadership has been transformative by all accounts. The work has been challenging but rewarding, I acknowledged. We've reimagined what development can mean when ethical considerations guide business decisions rather than merely constraining them. Another silence stretched between us, laden with unspoken history. Finally, James straightened his shoulders, meeting my gaze directly. I didn't ask to meet just for pleasantries, Eleanor. I needed to say things I should have said years ago. He took a steadying breath. I'm sorry, profoundly, comprehensively sorry for the ways I betrayed our marriage, disrespected your dignity, attempted to take what was rightfully yours, and placed my own desires above basic decency. The words hung between us, unexpected despite the obvious purpose of our meeting. I had imagined this moment during darker periods following our separation. James acknowledging his wrongs, expressing remorse, seeking forgiveness. The reality felt simultaneously vindicating and strangely hollow. Why did you do it, James? The question emerged unbidden. Not just the affairs or financial crimes, but the fundamental dishonesty that pervaded our marriage. What were you seeking that honesty and partnership couldn't provide? He considered the question seriously, gaze dropping to his hands. I've had 4 years to examine that very question, with professional guidance and enforced contemplation. A humorless smile flickered across his face. The answers aren't flattering. Insecurity disguised as ambition, fear of inadequacy masked by acquisition, validation sought through conquest rather than connection. That sounds like therapist language, I observed. It is, he acknowledged. But that doesn't make it untrue. The man you married was fundamentally broken in ways neither of us fully recognized, seeking external solutions to internal deficiencies, perpetually convinced that the next achievement, acquisition, or conquest would finally make me feel complete. He sighed. It never did, of course. So the cycle continued, escalating in both scale and consequence. I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his explanation. Why tell me this now? What do you hope to gain from this confession? Nothing, he replied, surprising me with his directness. I harbor no illusions about reconciliation or forgiveness. Those ships sailed long ago through my own actions. He met my gaze directly. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it. Because acknowledging truth to those we've wronged is fundamental to whatever integrity I might build in this final chapter of my life. The sincerity in his voice gave me pause. This wasn't the manipulative James I had divorced, the man who shaped reality to serve his interests. This was someone humbled by consequence, speaking truth without strategic agenda. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally. It has value, even coming years after the fact. We finished our coffee in strangely companionable silence, the tension between us shifting from active animosity to mutual recognition of a shared history both painful and formative. As we prepared to leave, James hesitated, then extracted an envelope from his jacket. Emily mentioned your 70th birthday is approaching, he said, extending the envelope toward me. I'd like you to have this, not as attempt to rewrite the past or purchase goodwill, but as acknowledgement of something I should have recognized decades ago. I accepted the envelope cautiously, opening it at his encouraging nod. Inside was a faded newspaper clipping from 1988, a feature on promising young architects from the university where I had studied. My own face smiled from the yellowed paper, alongside quotes about my design philosophy and professional aspirations. I found this in some old files while clearing out storage before prison, James explained quietly. I'd forgotten I'd kept it, this evidence of the brilliance I asked you to subordinate to my ambitions. He shook his head. What struck me most was the date. You were already engaging with ideas that Meridian is only now implementing under your leadership. You were decades ahead of your time, Eleanor, and I asked you to set that vision aside for mine. The faded image of my younger self, earnest, hopeful, unaware of the compromises ahead, brought unexpected emotion to my throat. Not regret exactly, but poignant recognition of paths diverged, potential temporarily deferred rather than permanently abandoned. Thank you for this, I said, carefully returning the clipping to its envelope. It's a meaningful gesture. We parted outside the restaurant with awkward formality, neither the bitter estrangement of our divorce nor the false cordiality of social convention. Simply two people who had once built a life together, now moving along separate paths with clear-eyed acknowledgement of what had been lost and what, perhaps, had been found through that very loss. Walking back to my car, I felt an unexpected lightness. Not happiness exactly, but completion. The circle that had begun with betrayal and upheaval had somehow closed with quiet dignity and truth, allowing whatever came next to emerge unburdened by unresolved grievance. That evening, I sat in my garden as twilight gathered, the newspaper clipping open beside me. My younger face gazed back with ambition untested by compromise, vision untempered by experience. Yet there was direct lineage between that hopeful architect and the woman I had become, the vision deferred but ultimately expressed, the capabilities temporarily redirected but eventually reclaimed. At 65, with professional fulfillment, financial security, and personal autonomy all firmly established, I recognized that my life had not been diminished by its unexpected turns, but enriched by them. The detours and delays had provided perspective that made eventual achievement more meaningful, had developed resilience that made independence more sustainable. The garden enfolded me in evening fragrance, jasmine, lavender, roses I had planted with my own hands in soil that was unquestionably mine. Above, stars emerged in familiar patterns, constants in a life of change. I breathed deeply, filling, my lungs with night air, my mind with appreciation for this moment of integration, my heart with quiet certainty that Eleanor Mitchell's most authentic chapter was the one currently unfolding. The divorce that had seemed catastrophic had ultimately been liberation. The betrayal that had felt devastating had become catalyst for self-reclamation. The estate that James had assumed was his had provided foundation for the life I was meant to build all along. Sometimes the end of one story reveals itself as prologue to another, one richer, truer, and infinitely more satisfying than we could have imagined when we first set aside our own narrative to support someone else's. My story, I realized with profound contentment, was still very much in progress, with the most meaningful chapters perhaps still waiting to be written. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.